Welcome to the Brouhaha with Dale McKee and Marshall Wood. Two sports talking sports with those in the know on the Brouhaha Show.
Good evening, all, and welcome to the Brouhaha, coming at you from the Brouhaha studio at WABO-FM 105.5 here in Waynesboro, Mississippi. Marshall Wood here with Dale McKee, ready to talk a little football. Dale, did you enjoy the NCAA games this weekend? Anything surprise you or stick out at you during the opening of college football this week?
Well, Marshall, I was just glad to see the fans back in the stands. I thought it brought a little bit more excitement to the game than it has, like last year when you basically had empty stadiums, things like this. The SEC did well in their games. I thought the biggest surprise to me out west, and we don't get much of it, but number 20 Washington was upset by Montana, which doesn't happen very often.
No, I was watching, catching the feeds on that, and I was shocked as the whole football world was at that one. That was a good call, Dale. What else sticks out at you from?
Well, really, I wanted to know your thoughts about that.
Well, I'll tell you some things that kind of stuck out to me. One, of course, was Tulane and how they represented themselves against the University of Oklahoma. They lost that game 40-35. Oklahoma was a perennial playoff team, and Tulane took them to the wire. That was exciting to me. Another situation, Fresno State, who's had a lot of success through the years, played Oregon close in a 31-24 loss, and Oregon's supposed to be the bell cow out there in the Pac-12 this year. Mississippi State found a way to win in the end, beating Louisiana Tech 35-34. That was a whole lot of fun listening to that one. And I come down here to a game. I watched Alabama play, and that really just kind of Alabama just did what Alabama does, just the same song, just different verse. And I enjoyed it, but no surprises. But now Clemson and Georgia. Did you watch that football game?
I watched some of it. I didn't get to watch the whole thing. I was actually I was doing some chores for my wife at that time.
Well, those things must be taken care of.
She did let me finish the Mississippi State ball game, which was nice of her, I thought, before we had to do the chores. But, yeah, I mean, like I said, it was just good to have college football back, kind of like how we knew it.
Yeah.
But, this COVID's going to be in this room. I mean, Lane Kiffin couldn't coach last night in the ball game against Louisville. And so COVID's always going to be the elephant in the room, as we've discussed before. But I think Georgia proved that with their defense, that they're probably going to run the table until they get to Atlanta. The only people I see bothering Georgia is going to be, in their division would be probably Florida. I'm not sure anybody else over there can really, compete with that defense.
I'm going to tell you that. Don't sell Clemson's defense short. There was not an offensive touchdown scored in that football game. It was a 10-3 football game, and Georgia's touchdown came off a pick six.
Yeah, and Georgia had kind of a veteran quarterback, and Clemson had, I'd say, a rookie quarterback. He did play some last year. But, when I am picking the division, how the division's going to stack up, I go see who has their starting quarterbacks back. That's the first thing I look at, and I think a starting quarterback is just very, very important, especially early in the year.
I was watching a show several years ago on ESPN, and it had several coaches at a round table. Saban was one of them, and Mullins was there, and 3 or 4 more. And they asked the question, apart from your quarterback, what's the most important position on your team? And they went through everybody, and they would talk about something. They got to Coach Saban. He said, well, it's the quarterback. He said, no, we said it apart from the quarterback. And he said, you can't get apart from the quarterback. It is the most important position on the team, bar none. And you agree with that?
Oh yes, I think that he's the general on the field, and so you have to have that. Plus, early in the year, Bobby Bowden used to say that your special teams are so important early in the year. They're a third of the game, but field position is important, and it depends on how much you really work on special teams. a lot of coaches, that everybody's so consumed with offense and defense, getting the offense and defense ready. You have to have your special teams people, just important.
Lots of things going on in the NCAA. We got the season kicking off, and of course the conference realignments continue with Brigham Young, Cincinnati, Central Florida, and Houston joining the Big 12. They lost 2 in Oklahoma and Texas, but got 4. 3 from the American Athletic Conference and Brigham Young University, who's independent in football. I don't think that's a real good trade, but the Big 12's fighting for survival, and let's add the AAC to the list of those fighting for survival. Round and round it goes, and where it stops no one knows. But now, Dale has a guest for us tonight. Rod Walker, a sports journalist with the Times-Picayune New Orleans Advocate, who will be talking with us about the New Orleans Saints and the upcoming NFL season. If you recognize his name, it's likely because he's covered football in Mississippi while working for the Clarion Ledger from August of 2001 through July 2013 before taking the position he now holds. We're going to take a break and be back with Dale's interview with Rod right after these words from our sponsors.
Do you have any roof damage or missing shingles? Do you need a roof inspection to ensure your roof is functioning properly? Look no further than the roofing specialist Jackson Brothers Construction Services. We are here to service you with affordable prices, amazing customer service, and quality work you'll be proud of. Call us today at 251-295-6442.
The Jackson Brothers Construction Services. They'll do you right. You heard it here first.
Phillips Building Supply in Laurel, your hometown building supply store since 1954. We are locally owned and pride ourselves on helping our customers find exactly what they need. From foundations to roofs to doors and windows, Phillips has it. For tools, hardware, lumber, and plywood, visit Phillips Building Supply.
All right, welcome to the show today is Rod Walker. He is a sports writer in the New Orleans area. Rod, I'm glad to have you on our show today.
Thanks for having me on, as always. Always good to connect with somebody in Mississippi again, so thanks for having me on.
Now, you're a native Mississippian, aren't you?
Yep, born and raised. Grew up in Yazoo City, Mississippi, and was there until 2013 and, made the move to New Orleans then. But, yeah, I'm still connected to the state, though. I'm always keeping up and still keep up with high school sports and all that stuff, so, yeah.
Well, we really appreciate it because we really enjoyed your writing there in the decade of the 2000s and that 2001 to, a little bit past 2010 there. And we really appreciate the job that Clarion Ledger did back in those days with you and Todd Kelly in the game because you really made high school football feel really important, and we really appreciate that. But today we're going to talk about the New Orleans Saints. First of all, can they replace Drew Brees?
Yeah, I think they can replace them. I think replacing the Drew that we saw the past 2 seasons, I guess, you could sort of tell that Drew didn't have some of that same pop in his arm. So I think replacing that part of it will be doable. I think you look at Jameis especially. He has a really strong arm, and which gives the team some threats that they didn't have last year because they can. Jameis can really fling it. I've seen him make some throws in training camp that were just incredible. Just how far he can throw a football, and so I think that aspect of it. I think they can replace him. But when you talk about that quarterback battle with Jameis and Taysom, both of those guys they've been a little inconsistent in training camp. They have really good days sometimes, and then there are some days when you think, especially Jameis, you say, okay, Jameis may pull ahead today, and then he'll come back with a bad throw or just a turnover. It's just something. And so neither one is really just taking hold of that job yet. And it's, I think a part of it is that they're not getting a whole lot of just 2 guys. Whenever they're going through the reps, you see, they do like 5 throws and then they move on to the next guy. So I don't know if they're really getting a chance to get into a rhythm that you'd like to see in training camp. And I was in the game the other night. There are some times they both have some high spots and some low spots. So that's sort of how it's been throughout camp.
Well, listen, as we're going through the offense there, what about the let's just go over position by position a little bit. What about the running back position, are they pretty solid there this year?
Yeah, I mean, you got Alvin Kamara in your team, you're really solid. I mean, I think
Well,
Kamara's
that's
probably
true. I mean, that was a dumb question, Rod.
No,
Forgive me.
I mean, he's definitely one of the better backs in
Oh,
in the
definitely.
entire NFL, I think. And, and I think actually, when you think about Alvin Kamara and Latavius Murray, I mean, I think that's two of the better backs in the league. I mean, both of those guys are really, as far as a tandem, I mean, I think if you ask most NFL coaches, I mean, I think they love to have Kamara and Latavius Murray as their 1-2 in the backfield. And both of those guys have been really good. And they brought in Devontae Freeman, who hadn't really shown us a whole lot. And if anybody got a chance to watch the Saints preseason opener, Tony Jones was a second-year back out of Notre Dame. I mean, he had a really solid game. He had a fumble, but outside of that fumble, he played really well. So I think the backfield is going to be really, really solid again this year. They'll be really good. And I'm not sure if we're going to the offensive line next, but since they kind of go hand in hand, I mean, I think the Saints, and I think most people agree, I mean, they say the Saints have one of the better offensive lines in the league, if not the best one. So, I mean, you put that offensive line with those running backs, and this team, they can really run the ball, and those guys pass protect really well up front. I mean, it's anchored, of course, by Teron Armstead on one side and Ryan Ramczyk on the other side. Those are two tackles, and Eric McCoy in the middle. They've just been really, really solid. And so if you want to have a strength of a team, you want it to be offensive line. I mean, that's kind of where it all starts, and that's where those games are won. So, they can make an offense even better. It makes your offense better when your offensive line is as good as the Saints can be up front.
That's true. Do they have depth up there? I mean, I know they got 5 solid starters, but do they have a little depth? And how many linemen do the Saints usually carry?
I would say the depth is, in the past few seasons, the depth's been good. I mean, because they've had guys that get banged up, and they've been able to just, plug a few guys in. They usually have, they carry 8 offensive linemen, and they usually have 2 or 3 guys that are in that second unit that are so versatile. So, I mean, if a tackle goes down, they have guys that can plug in, and they can, they'll slide a guard out to tackle if they need to, and plug somebody in. So I think, I'd say that the depth is pretty good, but obviously when this team is healthy and their starting 5 is when they're at their best. But, I mean, they do have guys that they've been able to plug in. I'll throw out Will Clapp, for example, who played at LSU, went to school here in New Orleans, and he's a guy that's kind of stuck around this roster, and they've been able to plug him in if they need him, and there's some other guys as well. So I think they'll be fine up front unless they don't need Ramczyk and Armstrong to go down, of course, but, if they can keep that core group together, I mean, this team can be really good up front.
The tight end position's always been pretty valuable to a New Orleans Saints offense here for the past 15 years or so. What do they look like at tight end?
Yeah, it's going to be a new group up there. I mean, Jared Cook's gone, Josh Hill is gone, and, those are guys that obviously Jared Cook had a really bad playoff game with the fumbles, but they brought in one of the guys they have. I don't say they brought him in, he's been here all the time, but Jawan Johnson's a guy who he was playing receiver last season. They ended up sliding him to tight end. He looked really good in camp. He picked up a little weight, and probably more of a better fit for him to be a tight end. I think he's a guy that I've been telling people, if you have a fantasy football team and you're looking for a sleeper guy, I think Jawan Johnson will be a good guy to add. I think he's going to really surprise people with his transition from receiver to tight end. So he'd be the guy. And, they drafted Adam Troutman last year, and he got in, and he had a couple of catches, and I think he'll be the other guy. And as far as tight ends, and they'll carry a third one on the roster, I'm sure, but those 2 are the main ones, no doubt.
All right, what about on the defense? Let's start on the line. Defensive line pretty strong?
Well, let me just touch on the receivers right quick.
I'm sorry. Excuse me.
No.
So we do have to have receivers, don't we? We sure do. I'm sorry. I was getting ahead of myself. Apologize.
That's probably the biggest question mark on that offense. Quarterback's obviously a question mark because you don't know who it's going to be, but the wide receivers are it's a concern, I think. I mean, Michael Thomas is going to miss the first part of the season because, his surgery was in June when, it would have been the team's much better off if they have that surgery in February when the season's over, but it was delayed until June. So now they're missing one of the best receivers in the league, a guy who's been very reliable for this team, and so he's out. Traquan Smith, who's been their number 2 receiver pretty much, or maybe even number 3, but he's a guy that's been banged up in camp, so we haven't seen him a lot. Emmanuel Sanders was on the team last year. He's in Buffalo now. So you look at the receiver corps, I mean, it's a really young group, and Marquez Callaway, who's an undrafted guy, he's been the main target so far in camp, and he's probably going to be the number 1 receiver if Traquan didn't come back for that season opener. So him and Deontay Harris, who's the return guy, are definitely the top 2. The Saints signed Kevin White 3 days ago. Kevin White's a guy that was the number 7 overall draft pick back in 2015. His career really hadn't panned out. Been banged up everywhere he's gone, and if he can stay healthy, he looked really good his first 2 days of practice, and he'll definitely give him some help at receiver. But that's a spot that's going to be a really big question mark for this team.
Well, I appreciate you reminding me about the wide receivers there, Rod.
No problem.
No. Okay, let's go over the defense a little bit. Defensive line, they look pretty good.
Yeah, they've surprised me. I knew the defensive ends would be good because Cam Jordan's been, he's climbing up that Saints career sacks list. I mean, I think he's second now. He's not far behind. This is Ricky Jackson, so I mean, he would probably surpass him either this season or next season. So the defensive ends are really good. I think Marcus Davenport, who's number 14 pick a few years back, he's been hurt throughout his career, but I think he may have that breakout year that everybody's been waiting on. Carl Granderson's another defensive end that's been really good. The interior of the defensive line is where the concern was. They lost so much. I mean, they lost Sheldon Rankins in free agency. They lost Malcolm Brown, and then they have David Onyemata, who's a really underrated defensive tackle. He's going to miss the first 6 games of the season because he's dealing with he was suspended, for using performance-enhancing drugs, so he's going to be out. So they're counting on a lot of young guys to plug in some holes in the middle, and they looked really good in the first preseason game, and you hope to see that stand up. There's a guy from Mississippi who went to Forest Hill High School in Jackson, Christian Ringo, who, he could very well be a part of that mix in the interior of the defensive line.
Okay. It's always great to have Mississippians on the Saints. Most of them turned out to be pretty good players for them. What about linebacker?
Speaking of Mississippi, you got Demario Davis.
Oh, yeah.
From Brandon, played at Brandon High School, went to Arkansas State. He's become one of the best linebackers in the league since he's, joined the Saints. His career started off with, he was with the Jets and the Browns for years, and then he came to the Saints, and his career just sort of took off. And it's kind of funny how that works. You get in the right team, and everything clicks. And so Demario's been really, really good, and the linebackers have been really strong. And going into camp, we were all concerned about, okay, we know Demario's good, but who else is going to be able to play? And all these guys have really stepped up. And there's Quan Alexander, who Quan's from Alabama originally, but went to LSU. Tore his Achilles last season in December, and he's back already, and he's running with the first team unit in training camp, which is remarkable because we know how tough those Achilles injuries are when they get torn. But he's played really well. Pete Werner, who they just drafted, he looks good. Zach Bond, who they drafted last year at linebacker, he's been really good. Zach went to Wisconsin, and I just think the linebacker unit is really, really good this year, which is a surprise because we just went into this camp thinking they'd be down.
Okay, and the final one is the secondary as far as the defense.
Oh, the secondary. Now, the cornerback position is what we've talked about ever since, I guess it was back in March when they lost Janoris Jenkins to the Titans. They sort of just had to let him go because they didn't have the money. I mean, the salary cap for the salary cap sort of squeezed them out of being able to hold on to him. So obviously Marshawn Lattimore on the other side is really solid at corner, but the number 2 cornerback is an issue. And we thought they'd be able to get a big name in free agency, and they weren't able to, or they haven't been able to. And so right now they're counting on Paul Samadipo, who they drafted out of Stanford, and they also have Ken Crawley, who's been with the team for a few years. But that number 2 cornerback spot, it's a concern. It's still a concern, and we'll have to see how that goes. The safeties are really solid with Marcus Williams and Malcolm Jenkins back there. Those 2 guys are really, they're just rock solid, in the back end of the defense. But the other cornerback position is a huge concern for this team, and it will be, until we find out how good the guys they have there are.
Okay, why don't you quickly go over the field goal and the punter, since we're probably going to have some changes there.
Yeah, Thomas Morstead, they let him go. He's the guy that has been with this team since, 2009. He was so reliable, but they brought in Blake. They had Blake Gillikin on the squad last year, but he was just a practice team player, and he is a phenomenal punter and has been really consistent and solid in training camp. And so I don't think they'll miss Thomas Morstead as much as I thought originally. I think this guy's good. As of the Saints, they didn't even have Will Lutz, who's been really solid. He had surgery last week as a kick, and this was a kicker that was pretty reliable. I mean, if the Saints lined up for a field goal, you could, for the most part, you could chalk it up that it was going to be good. But but he just had his surgery, so they're without a kicker, and hopefully they can get one soon. And so yeah, I mean they're trying out kickers now. I mean that's obviously a big concern, especially when you have an offense that you don't know how good the offense is going to be. So you need a kicker you can rely on, and here we are, a few weeks before the season starts, and they're still trying out one. So,
what do you think of the Saints' chances this year in the division? Just in the division.
In the division, I mean, when the schedule first came out, I picked the Saints to go 11. They're playing 17 games this year. I picked them to go 11-6, I believe, and then they had all these issues coming up, from the Anyamata suspension to this injury, the Will Lutz injury and the Michael Thomas surgery. So I mean, I dropped down from 11-7 to 9-8, and now I'm not really optimistic on that. I think this team they could struggle if things don't start off well for them. And I think you asked about the division. I think Tampa Bay, regardless, I think Tampa Bay was going to win this division. They have everybody returning from a Super Bowl team that got better as the season went on. So I'd be shocked if the Saints could beat the Buccaneers to win the division. Outside of that, I mean, I think the Saints are definitely I think they'll still be the second best team in the division. I do think the Falcons are going to be improved this year. So I think the Saints are going to be second in the division. Getting that playoff spot, I think it's going to be tough, but I picked them to get in the playoffs regardless. But yeah, I don't see them winning the division. I mean, they've won that division, the NFC South, for 4 years in a row, which had never been done. But 5 years in a row would be it would be Sean Payton's best job yet if he can win that division again.
Well, Sean, excuse me, we're talking about Sean now. I'm sorry. Rod, listen, we really appreciate your time, and we know you're a very busy man. Besides the Saints, what else do you cover in New Orleans, and how can our listeners follow you and your writing?
I'm the columnist here for the Times-Picayune/Advocate, and I cover the Pelicans. I cover some Tulane football, but primarily I'm responsible for the Saints and the Pelicans. But again, I do Tulane, and every now and then I'll do some some high school football, especially I got a chance to whatever, like Arch Manning, who is Arch's grandson, and Peyton and Eli's nephew, and Cooper's son. He plays here, and he's one of the top quarterbacks in the country as far as high school. So I'll still dip into the high school ranks, especially when it's a player like that that I want to get a chance to see. So, and he's a phenomenal quarterback and is really going to be special. And I'd be shocked if barring injuries or something just really going wrong. I mean, to me, he's a surefire NFL guy. So anyway, I mean, I pretty much cover, everything here that I can, but my primary focus is Saints and Pelicans. And people can follow me on Twitter. It's Rod Walker Nola, and my stories are all under just NOLA.com is the website, NOLA.com.
Okay, well, Rod, great catching up with you, and great in-depth preview of the Saints this year, because we have a lot of Saints fans in this area, as you know well.
Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah.
So
anytime you need me on, just feel free to reach out, man. I'm always willing to talk on shows and things like this, especially when it's Mississippi. So don't ever hesitate to reach out to me.
Thank you, Rod. We appreciate you so much.
All right. Thanks, man.
All right, bye.
Do you have any roof damage or missing shingles? Do you need a roof inspection to ensure your roof is functioning properly? Look no further than the roofing specialist Jackson Brothers Construction Services. We are here to service you with affordable prices, amazing customer service, and quality work you'll be proud of. Call us today at 251-295-6442.
The Jackson Brothers Construction Services. They'll do you right. You heard it here first.
Phillips Building Supply in Laurel, your hometown building supply store since 1954. We are locally owned and pride ourselves on helping our customers find exactly what they need. From foundations to roofs to doors and windows, Phillips has it. For tools, hardware, lumber, and plywood, visit Phillips Building Supply.
Welcome back, everybody. Dale, I really enjoyed Rod's work here in Mississippi and thought he did a great job covering high school football here. I think we played host to him several times through his tenure at the Clarion Ledger here in Wayne County. It was a good interview, Dale, and we appreciate that. We appreciate so much that, we're going to offer you a special prize again tonight for the work that you do. I mean, we don't want this to go unrewarded. So we're going to offer you some psychological evaluation. We're going to continue with this because your psychological health is health is very important to us. So, we had a little success with this last week. I think you're showing great improvement psychologically. So, you remember how we did this, Dale, with the word association test? Do you remember that?
Yes. How did I do? Did you ever grade them?
Well, I'm not ready to, not ready to address that issue yet, but I want y'all to listen here. This is the paper that holds all of the questions, and Dale, your reaction is going to hold all of the answers. So I'm going to give you a word, and like I did last time, and I don't want you combining things. You got tricky with us last week, and that's been noted in your record, by the way. But now we give you a word or a phrase or a name, whatever I give you, you say the first thought that comes to your mind. And remember, we are on the radio, so keep that in mind. All right, here's your one. Word association. First thing that comes to your mind. Al Davis. Do I need to give you some help? Do you know who Al Davis is?
Yes, I do.
What comes to mind?
Renegade.
Renegade. Man, I like that. You know a phrase that I say a lot that's meant a lot to me and I've used a lot through the years that he's famous for. Do you know that phrase? Tell us about it.
Win, baby, win.
Just win, baby. Al Davis. All righty.
I should have used that word win because there was just something about the Oakland Raiders. Even though I grew up kind of a Kansas City Chiefs fan in the when they were in their heyday back in the early days of the AFL.
Yeah.
But you just had to admire the consistency that they had after they entered the NFL. They competed, and they competed well. I have a story about Al Davis.
Let's hear it.
Well, I have a friend used to coach in Laurel named George Blair. George is retired now. George was playing for the Ole Miss football team in the Sugar Bowl against Rice. And this was like 1961. And George is telling me this story about him. And he said that Al came up to his room before the game. And he said he was dressed very unusual. And, of course, you've probably seen some of Al's
Yeah.
dresses on the sidelines.
Yeah, lots of gold and chains.
And so he said that Al's talking to him about signing with the Raiders. This is when the Raiders were in the AFL, and they were, competing and trying to steal players from the NFL. And so he asked George and them, I can't remember George's roommate, but he told him, he said, may I stay in your room until the game's over? He said, I don't have a place to stay. And,
Bless his heart.
back then, the AFL didn't have much money probably. But anyway, he was an assistant coach at that time for the L.A. Chargers. I say L.A. Chargers because they were only in Los Angeles for 1 year in the 60s, and then they moved to San Diego and had, a great run there till a few years ago. And so George ended up signing with that team, and one of the deals was George's first game. George was one of those, he played in the Senior Bowl, and he played in the Chicago All-Star team against the NFL champion Philadelphia Eagles that year. And then the Raiders flew him out to Hawaii for their preseason game. That was their first preseason game. And George ended up playing defensive back and kicker. And, of course, George goes on, besides the Al Davis story, Chuck Noll was on that staff. Sid Gilman was the head coach. So they had some legendary coaches on that.
Yes, they did.
On that Raider team, the Charger team of that time. And they went on to win the 1964 AFL championship against Buffalo. And so George was a defensive back kicker. And actually, at one time, George Blair held the AFL record for percentage of field goals made. And he was a straight-on kicker. And what's unusual about George kicking for the Chargers, he never kicked at Ole Miss. They had a kicker named Alan Green. And the kicking coach at Ole Miss didn't like the way he kicked. But evidently he kicked better in the pros than he did in college. But anyway, I tell you that story because George was telling me about that. Yeah. And the Giants, New York Giants, ended up drafting George like in the, one of the rounds back in those days, 5th or 6th round, ever what it was. But he decided he had a better chance to play at that time for the upstart Chargers, and so that's what he did. But that was just an interesting story. But then he went on to tell me about five or 6 years later, he gets a call from Al Davis when he's coaching at Laurel, and Al saying, listen, can you go talk to this Ole Miss guy into signing with us? If he signs with us, I'll give you $600. George said, well, I'll go talk to him and see what he says. George went. The guy ended up signing, and George's still waiting on that check.
Well, I've been waiting on a check or two myself, but I'm not giving up hope.
Okay, is our time over so I don't have to answer any more?
Yeah, you did a real good job.
I don't have to answer any more words?
Good job. You're off the hook. But now, since we still owe you some psychological evaluation, and folks are listening to this.
Give me one more.
Not going to give you another one. You're going to have to wait. You're going to have to wait just dread it all week.
I'm sorry.
No problem, Dale. But thanks for being a good sport. We appreciate you and what you bring to the Brouhaha. We also appreciate our sponsors for helping make this possible. Last but not least, thank you for listening in. That is all the time we have for this week, but Dale and I will be back next week for more of the Brouhaha. Jamie, get us out of here.
You've been listening to the Brouhaha with Dale McKee and Marshall Wood. Heard Tuesday evening, 6 p.m. on WABO. For more of the Brouhaha, follow us during the week on Facebook and WABO.